All right. I'd like to begin. How should I say? First of all, I put numbers on your video presentation with comments for the most part. They were really good. You could figure that out by the high number, but and I put numbers on the discussion, quiz 5. And what I wanted to say is this. A lot of them were really good. And some of them I had real problems trying to figure out exactly what was being said there. And so I actually cut and paste a couple of responses onto this Word document. And you see there are 4 parts of that first question. And it's about overall quality, the information, the analysis, and the subject matter. And some of you broke it down into 4 paragraphs, which was really good because I could understand exactly what you were saying. Some of the others were pretty good. They were written in more of a single paragraph or 2 style, but at least it followed the sequence of the question. And then there were a lot of them, or some of them, I'm not putting a number on it, but some of them were just simply cheerleading. Oh, I like that. That was really great. Yeah, I'd like to see it again. Wow, you really changed my mind. That's not really a good critique. And so anyway, with some of you, the ones who did that, you got points deducted, but I didn't go really deep in knocking off points. And the reason is that I assume that that the reason that was the case is that a lot of you are first-year college students and you haven't really been exposed to that. But when you see a question like I presented here, you really need to break it down and put your answer in the sequence that the question asked for. And for those of you who didn't, you might want to consider politics. You ever notice that politics, they ask politicians questions and then they just say something else? Yeah, well, when I was a boy, my dad said, hey, Joey, grow up to be an honest man, and they said, well, what's that have to do with the budget deficit? Oh, yeah, well, politicians are great at answering the question they want to hear, not the question being asked. So anyway, like I say, it was kind of easy on that, relatively so. And in part, I'm hoping that this is a lesson, because as you go through this process, the education, you really need to kind of do that. Look at the questions a little more critically and answer in that. And the ones that kind of didn't do that, I put a comment on there like follow the prompt or something. So anyway, that's my spiel. Nobody's going to fail this course because of this, but bottom line is I had an opportunity to teach you guys something, and I'm really happy about that. And so another thing is that I put numbers on your video And overall, the videos as collectively, they were really pretty good. I think the most comments I had about those was to do a little bit more research, dig a little deeper, and find a pronunciation guide. Because there are a lot of terms and a lot of names that are what you would say peculiar to this course. And so look them up. It's real easy. I do it on my phone all the time. I want to hear a pronunciation of something, boom, right there. And so anyway, but they were good. You guys saw them. They were good. So, and if you have any questions, that's what I do. So anyway, I was real happy with the whole process overall. I know that in the future, I'll probably go over some of these things in advance. But these are better than last year or even last semester, and in part because I was able to go through this and kind of tip you off to some of the mistakes that were made in the past. So you guys listening, you did good work. And one more thing. Now, I have a box of Kleenexes here somewhere if you need them. But this is the next to the last class meeting. You don't have to start crying. If you take a deep breath. Anyway, it's been a good semester. I've enjoyed being with you guys, and I have a few things yet to talk about. I have a whole bunch of PowerPoints. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but we'll talk about them until we don't have any more class time. So this is still some of that global art. This is what's going on right now. You know, and for the most part, this is 2015. So in a lot of ways, you say, well, that was 8 years ago, and you'd be right. But in terms of an art history book, something that happened 8 years ago is like relatively new. And so anyway, this is Damien Hirst, and he is what we call, in a lot of ways, he calls himself a conceptual artist. And that is that his artwork doesn't really have a particular style, which was something that when you guys did your videos, talked about particular styles and movements and things like that. Artists today, many just do different things, unrelated, except for the point that they're about the idea. And so anyway, this is Hydra and Kali. And this really basically takes, well, it's made out of a bunch of stuff here. It's bronze and it's cast and it's painted and stuff. But it's taking mythology or religion, mythology in case of the Hydra, Kali in case of religion, but taking these supernatural figures from two different cultures and having them face off. And the Hydra is from the Greco-Roman era, and it is a serpent that has like, well, 7 heads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think it was a 7-headed serpent. Anyway, and Kali, Hindu, warrior, god. And so anyway, this is kind of an idea, and it's kind of an idea that I think is really kind of important, what we're going to talk about here later today and definitely on Wednesday. And that is that all of this globalization has kind of melded various cultures and various traditions together. Back in the world of yesteryear, cultures kind of existed independently of each other. There was no what we would call cross-pollination, and what would happen in the ancient Greco-Roman world was different than what was happening, say, in South Asia, India, and modern day South Asia. And China was completely in its own way different. Even though China and India are right next to each other, they had a natural barrier called the Himalayas, which kind of effectively separated those cultures for a long, long time. But anyway, that's really the concept here. And this is another Damien Hirst. And look what this sold for. That's not a typo. 100 million. And I don't have the date on here, and that's too bad. But this was something that happened 10, 12 years ago. Damien Hirst. And as you can see, this doesn't really have much to do with Kali and Hydra. It is in itself something totally different. Diamond encrusted platinum skull by artist Damien Hirst was bought by an investment group for the asking price of 100 million. And I talked about that too, that the art as investment is really a big factor in what we see as, quote, high art or fine art in this day and age. It's an economic critique, or it's an economic standard for valuing. And so when Damien Hirst made this, he made it to that point. And the idea that it sold for 100 million kind of baits the other part of the question. Is it worth 100 million because Damien Hirst made it? Is it worth 100 million because it's beautiful and represents our day and age? Well, in a kind of a way, that's true. But he made this specifically to debate the question, why is this worth 100 million? Is it because of those issues? Or is it because if you took all of these diamonds off and you melted down to platinum, you'd have $100 million worth of gemstones and precious metal. In fact, it took about that much. I don't know the exact number, but it took a lot of money just to make this thing. And the idea that it's a skull, obviously the skull subject matter motif across cultures, across time. Marisol. The Last Supper. Now, what Marisol did, she's a sculptor, and she put some of the inventions of Cubism, and that is breaking apart objects and putting them back together on the artist's terms. And so you got these things that is really right out of Cubism. If you take a close look at it, the heads and the bodies and the hands and all of this, they occupy different kinds of space. So it goes from Picasso and all the way back to, whoa, we had a couple of presentations on Leonardo's Last Supper. And so it's a traditional thing. And as I'm looking at it, I think it baits another question too. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Was this guy sitting over here? Judas Iscariot? I'm guessing so. And there are those that actually ascribe, this is a weird thing too, but art history unveils a lot of crazy things that have happened through the centuries, but a lot of artists through the Renaissance period and even before depicted Judas as having red hair. Don't know why that is. It persisted. This guy, one of my favorites, Mark Tansey, A Short History of Modernist Painting. Now, I know you're asking yourself, what the heck is this all about? Or you're saying, why do I gotta look at this? Why is this? Well, let me tell you, there are a lot of mythologies in art history and especially in Western art. And there are all these stories about why art is art, what differentiates art from other objects. And so this is really in some ways about art making and art criticism. But check this out. This is a woman with a garden hose, and she is what? Washing a window. Well, how many times have you heard about the saying, art will help you see things more clearly? How many times, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there have been a lot of people talk about paintings and the advent of the frame around a painting as it functions like a window to another reality. Now, we don't quite see it that way these days, but you can imagine that, can't you? And that was really kind of popular to say during Leonardo's time, and the idea of Leonardo painting the Mona Lisa with this fantastic landscape in the back. Well, that was the thing. These artists that could paint with a great deal of verisimilitude. Whoa, that's another vocabulary term. That just means that it's true to life. Verisimilitude, you can almost break it down into the root words of being very similar to. Fool the eye. At any rate, that was what was happening by the time the High Renaissance came around. They could make things that would almost look like there was a hole in the wall, and right behind it, there was this woman smiling right back at you. We'll call her Mona Lisa. Anyway, that's one theory, and that's the first panel of this triptych. What's it? Is the guy butting his head up against a brick wall? Yep. And that is an allegory that artists often, and you artists know this to be true, sometimes it is like butting your head up against a brick wall, trying to do what you want to do. And so it's an exercise in it's not an exercise in futility, but it's an exercise in trying to here in an attempt to do something that's really very difficult, period. And now we got this, a chicken and a mirror. And that goes to that verisimilitude as well. There were philosophers, art philosophers, and they would do things like they would paint a picture of a chicken, say, and they would see if the chicken would respond, thinking that that was an actual chicken. And put this chicken in front of a mirror. That's one way of kind of doing the same thing. How many of these do I have? No, I don't have this. Actually, Pansy did another one that related to this idea too. It was called the innocent eye test. And it had everything to do with those romantic painters of the 19th century. And I'm trying to remember who did Bierstadt. Trying to remember. Sadie Shelton. Is that you? I'm thinking, anyway, they would put these huge landscape paintings and they would bring a cow in to see the painting. And the whole test was to see if the cow would think that that was actually a landscape. Would they go into, run right into it and try to eat the grass from the pasture that was depicted in the painting? And if you know the scale of some of those paintings from the era, same kind of plausible. And it was called the innocent eye test. It was actually a thing that was done in the 19th century. So anyway, a short history, of modernist painting. Here's another one of Mark Tansey's works, The Triumph of the New York School. So what the heck is going on here? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Well, I think at some point, probably around when I was talking about Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko and abstract expressionism and the Second World War, and talking about how a lot of the French artists escaped Nazi tyranny and they came to the US. And then there was a generation of very talented, very innovative American artists. And those American artists were the abstract expressionists. And subsequently, New York became the world capital of art. Now, I don't know if we still have that so much. There are many capitals of art, but New York became the center. It was where all of the new stuff was being done. It was where all of the innovations were taking place. It was seen as the most important place to go if you wanted to be a studio artist. And so the triumph of the New York School, now I got an advantage over you guys. See these? These are French uniforms, and this depicts in its own way that moment when Paris no longer was the center of the Western art world, and they were surrendering to all of the guys on this side who are the Americans. And he portrays it. You see, the Americans had at the time, the high-tech warfare equipment like this half-track. French are over here on horseback with their lances, and some of these French soldiers and officers are still kind of mired in the 19th century, wearing 19th century uniforms. Bottom line, that's the French, and they're signing the surrender document. And here, right there, that is a very well-known, very noted American critic named Clement Greenberg. And he was pretty much the spokesperson for all of this new American advanced art. And right here, I'm going to zoom in on this because this is like really so cool. I showed you that film of Jackson Pollock. This is Jackson Pollock right there. He's right there in front smoking a cigarette. And so we have the photographers. This guy here is Barnett Newman. This guy here is Robert Motherwell, and some of the others I'm not exactly sure of. It's been said that this is photographer Margaret Bork White. Photographer extraordinaire, was a photographer for Life magazine, one of the great photographers this country ever produced. But anyway, that's what his work. And why is that important? Well, it's art about art about art history, and actually bringing to life some of the mythology that we're talking about here with Damien Hirst. You know, it's like really kind of a look back at what we thought we knew. And so anyway, Anselm Kiefer, this is called German Expressionism. And you see the size of these, 10 feet and 10 inches high by 18 feet, 2 inches, huge paintings. And a lot of his work looks like this. It looks like a landscape that has been devastated by war. Anselm Kiefer talked about, extensively talked about being a German, a son of a Nazi, and how his generation had been made to pay for the sins of the father. They had kind of had this national shame for all the evil that Hitler and the Nazis had done. And so anyway, a lot of personal stuff going on. Chicago Board of Trade, just like really kind of cool too. It's a C print, which is Cibachrome. It was really, we don't do this anymore, but back in the day when you bought Kodak Cibachrome film, it was like the colors were perfect. It was very high res. If you had a good enough camera, you could take awesome pictures with this. And so anyway, Chicago Board of Trade, but take a look at it. It almost looks like an abstract painting in its own way. And so blurring the lines between abstraction and realism. And then, Guangzhou, wild vines with flowers like pearls. What you see, and this is 1997, it's been 25 years ago. Bottom line, we find a lot of what I was talking about earlier, cross-pollination. And a lot of things that were, say, invented in America, abstract expressionism, pop art, minimalism, all of that stuff, they find its way around the world. And other artists use those ideas for their own purposes. And so this is ink on paper, but is it reminiscent of Jackson Pollock from 50 years earlier? A lot of people say, yeah, and that is this influence. What we have, and this is like really big in today's world, we have like artists from Asia, places like Japan and China, and they're doing stuff that's very similar to, say, Andy Warhol and other pop artists, Roy Lichtenstein and so on. We have others doing things like this that are very influenced by abstract expressionism. Here's another example. Song Tsunami, Summer Trees, ink on paper. Compare that to Morris Louis and the stain paintings of the 1950s. This guy, the wall cone, Julian Schnabel, he was a guy that actually was kind of a big deal at the same time as people like Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring and those. But he was doing a different thing. He was enhancing the surfaces of these paintings. And a lot of these are actually, it says oil plates. Those are actually plates like you get from, like you get your food at IHOP or something. And he would bust them up and paste them, glue them on here. Bronze, fiberglass, and Bondo. Bondo is what helps make this stay together. You know what Bondo is? It's like a fiberglass resin. And the reason I know it is that back in my day, if you had rust on your car, and they rusted out pretty quickly after a couple of years, you sand out, grind out the rust, and fill that hole with Bondo. Anyway, it's fiberglass resin. Sand it down, paint over it, nobody ever knows. Anyway, but at any rate, this is another thing that's going on. The paintings, in a lot of ways, and this kind of is part of it, a lot of the paintings start to move into the area of sculpture. This is Elizabeth Murray. And this painting, it's oil on canvas on wood. So parts of this is an actual canvas. Parts of this is plywood. But you see, it's an abstract painting to be sure, but it's also in that gray area between sculpture and painting. Artists are exploring the gray areas, the middle ground. And I want to move this back here because this guy here, Clement Greenberg, he was adamant that sculpture is 3D, painting should be 2D. He drew the line. He said there shouldn't be anything in between. He was really kind of an ideological art critic in his own way. But, you know, by the time we get to the 80s, these people are kind of doing something totally against Greenberg philosophy. Helen Oji, Mount St. Helens. You know, guys know what Mount St. Helens is? Ah, yeah, good. Huge volcanic eruption that happened in 1980. It was in the Pacific Northwest in Washington, to be sure. And it was one of the largest volcanic eruptions. This other stuff here, acrylic Roplex. When I was in graduate school, Rollex was like the thing. It's really like acrylic paint with no pigment. And so you could really fatten up, if you will, your paint, so you could get all of this texture out of your ordinary acrylic paint and on this glitter, and you could mix all stuff with it. Yayoi Kusama in a wheelchair in front of a selection of her acrylic on canvas paintings. And so, yeah, check this out. This is really quite remarkable. And in its own way, it kind of looks a little bit like pop art. It kind of looks like abstraction. It kind of looks like a lot of different things. And some of this drawing here actually looks like something that might have come out of a whole other culture, not Western culture, as does a lot of her imagery. And so, Symptom, 1987. There are a lot of artists that are actually bringing materials from the environment into the exhibition space. And it's simply branches, tree branches, and they're kind of semi-woven, put together as this sculpture. I showed you El Anatsui before, the guy that takes abandoned, discarded materials, weaves them together, puts them together with fine copper wire, aluminum bottle tops and cans, copper wire, and video art becomes kind of a big thing too. Again, we're moving out of strict sculpture, strict painting. We're looking at all of the area in between, and we're actually branching out into other media, in this case, video. And all of this looks pretty quaint because who has a TV like that anymore? Of course, that's 1988. But to do all of these things, to put these degree certificates on the wall and stuff, and this poor woman cornered, speaking to empty chairs and a table that's turned over. Something of a statement about how, and this is before we had this thing, but video communication, at least in 1988, was really a one-way idea. There was no really way to know who was watching your presentation or your lecture. And so that's really kind of what this is about. Bill Viola, The Crossing. And so this guy does something that's a little different. The kind of things that he does actually start to show up in movies, but this was before IMAX, mind you. But this screen is like 16 feet high. And you may have seen some of this in museums and galleries. It's not quite as big a deal anymore, but you get into this small room with the walls painted black and all of the lights turned out, and the only light is the projection of the image. And typically having massive speakers that, would actually shake the room nearly, and really you could feel the impact of the sound. And so that's with 2 channels of color video projection. And so this has kind of a stereo effect, I might add too. that you have projection coming from two ways. You get a little more 3D, but that's, where do you go? Art chases new media invariably. And a lot of the presentations that you guys gave, stringing them all together, in some ways, you could make a case for advancements in technology through the time that people gave. You did Gilberti, right? That was probably one of the oldest ones, but you see, that was a good choice for being a good starting point, to create this lifelike sculpture and stuff. But then we go all the way through, and then somebody did Albert Bierstadt, as I was talking about, these huge romantic paintings. Izzy's not here. The Oath of the Horatii, gigantic epic paintings. Long way, lots of development over the years, and it's still happening. This guy here is really kind of funny too. Tony Orsler, or Ausler, I think it was Orsler. Anyway, video projection. And what these are, it says ceramics, glass, video player. These things are like ceramic heads. They're actually like eggs. They're just shaped kind of in an ovate, kind of egg-like shape. They're three-dimensional. And he had these tiny little projectors, and he would project faces onto these objects, and he had speakers, and they would say things, and a lot of these were really kind of funny, like, get off my head, and hey, you be quiet, hey, what's up here, But the idea of something of, see, and this is all old technology, video player, video cassette, and a projector, that if you had a projector and you had a surface, that you could make anything, even a big blob of ceramics, seem to be human. And, just different things. Installations, that's another big thing too. Artists begin using the gallery spaces as part of their work. In this case, Jenny Holzer, one of my favorites, Untitled Selections from Truism, and she is really, that's her art. Her art is really language and messaging, and she does stuff on message boards and stuff. She was a lot like associated with Barbara Kruger, that we saw, your gaze hits the side of my face, your body is a battleground. Well, Holzer just used the words, never, ever put an accompanying image with that. But men are not monogamous by nature. Low expectations are good protection. Monomania is a prerequisite of success. And you see, they're just those little light boards that you don't see too much anymore. It's LEDs, everything. But at any rate, she put this all around the perimeter, and these messages kind of circulate in this space. Here's somebody in the same space at the Guggenheim. This is in the Guggenheim too, Solomon R. Guggenheim. Matthew Barney. And he did a lot of video performance art. And he did a lot of video that was in its own way kind of gender bending, which, as you see here, 2003, 20 years ago, that was kind of cutting edge then. It's not so much that way anymore. But he would do gender bending things, and he would do things that would kind of bend human identity itself. And so he had these videos of himself kind of like this, and he had these big floppy ears, and he kind of looked more like a cartoon character than a human. But the idea that if you had these tools, you could really do that kind of stuff. And check this out. A book from the sky, an installation of woodblock printed books at the Elvium. Now the Chazen Museum of Art, University of Wisconsin. You know why I'm doing that? I went there. I was there when this was up. Anyway. But anyway, you know, the idea of the printed word, the spoken word, language itself becoming a big part of art, period. Installation at the Museum of Modern Art, balloons, sandbags, kind of just the juxtaposition of all of this stuff, having things like balloons and sandbags. That's really, in some ways, kind of startling, I think. But anyway, all of the, anyway. And sometimes these folks just do things that are visually just impressive. Styrofoam cups, variable, and hot glue, variable dimensions. So to take styrofoam cups, glue them together and hang them from the ceiling, let the light come through. That's like El Anatsui, who takes the bottle caps and the tin cans and stuff, and taking detritus, stuff that gets thrown away, dispensable stuff, and turning it into something beautiful. And when I talked about El Anatsui, alchemy. Shibboleth. This big crack. Earth art. I showed you this one here too. Here, yeah. Cameo Tishia, excuse me. Earth art. Well, he's taken the earth and bringing it into the natural world, into the museum space. Andy Goldsworthy was another one of those earth artists. And he's taken these cracked rock spiral. And this is from Scotland. And basically just put this on the beach, took a picture of it. There's a lot of discussion about some of this stuff. Is the photograph the art, or is the object itself the art? Now, Andy Goldsworthy makes his things and then lets nature take its course. And if they just fade away after time, that just ends up on the beach being buried in sand or something, that's just all right. It's the natural process. But this other group, actually, husband and wife team, Christo and Jean-Claude, Surrounded Islands. Doesn't tell you what this is, but this is like some kind of plastic sheeting. And they took these small islands in Biscayne Bay, which is, there's Miami right there. And they surrounded these, they actually made art out of Biscayne Bay. And that was like real popular. And Christo and John Claude. I don't know if I have any other slides. No. They did a lot of things. They were big in the 1980s, and they went out in the environment. They made art. And the first big splash they made in the US was a thing called a running fence. And it was poles, and it was this kind of plastic, some kind of nylon fabric. And it was a fence that actually ran for miles and miles and miles across Northern California. Wow, that's a new idea. Making art on the scale that you could actually see it from space. And in some ways, it kind of reverts back to ancient cultures that did effigy mounds and things like that. They actually had art, the Nazca lines in Peru. You can only see them from above, you know, that kind of scale, that kind of art. They had another one called Wrapped Coastline, where they, instead of wrapping these islands, they had a coastline in Australia, and they covered it with this plastic. Well, the downfall of Christo and John Claude was this. They were like rock superstars in the 1980s and the early 90s. But people started to figure out that cutting off the sunlight and the oxygen around these small islands are wrapping a coastline in vinyl plastic kills a lot of animals and wildlife and natural flora and fauna. This was highly destructive to the environment. And so that's kind of the epitaph of John Claude and Christo. But at any rate, for a while, this was like a big thing. Violin, Vietnam Veterans Memorial. This is real famous. She was actually, and she's still a working artist. She's still doing a lot of important things. But she was a graduate student at Yale University. She submitted a proposal for this. And it was the accepted proposal. And if you don't mind, I'm going to offer a little bit of explanation on this, because it's pretty much what she said about the work. A lot of people didn't like this. They thought this was not an appropriate monument for those who died and fought in the Vietnam War. We want a big statue. We want Iwo Jima with the Marines holding up the US flag. We want something glorious. By contrast, this didn't seem that glorious. As a matter of fact, it was down. It was not upright. It was actually under the surface. They had to dig this out to put this in. And if you ever had the opportunity to go there, you'll see that you go downhill, you go uphill. This is how you get through it. This is polished black marble. And the names of those American soldiers who died in Vietnam are inscribed on this black marble. And they go by years. And up here in this corner where there's not very many, I don't remember the exact year, but probably something like 1963, when the US were just advisors over there, you know, a few military personnel killed. But as we go on, as we move this way, 64, 65, 66, 67, there's a lot more names. And then you get right here at the nadir, the low point. That's 1968. And this is where most most names show up, 68, 69. And that's when the war was at its fiercest, when the casualties were highest. And gradually, the war wound down all the way up here till like you get to 1975. But all of the names of all of the soldiers, sailors, Marines who died, their names are up here. And as I said a moment ago, a lot of people wanted a different kind of war memorial than this. This was actually quite controversial. And you see, it was in 1981, 83. And this was only like not even 10 years after the war was over, but we didn't want this. It's proven to be probably one of the most respected war monuments ever created, at least in the United States, because, and I know some of these people that are engraved on the wall too. People go there now and have been for 30 years, 40 years now. They bring a piece of paper, put it up there, crayon or pencil or something, and they get the name of their loved one. And each and every person is memorialized. It's not some big statue that's supposed to represent everybody and all of the people. So anyway, this was like a stroke of genius, if you may. Rachel Whiteread Holocaust Memorial. And you can see here a lot of stuff inscribed here. Rachel Whiteread. She's a sculptor, and she is noted for making sculpture of negative spaces. If that makes any sense. But this is a mold of the inside of a gas chamber at a concentration camp. And so it doesn't look like it, it's just the inside. But she did a lot of stuff that was like that. She would, let's say she would make a sculpture of this table. It would be all of the space underneath, not the top, not the legs, but all of that negative space. Everything was a mold, if you will. And she used that gas chamber as the mold for this. And so, another very effective memorial. And Rachel Whiteread, she's an English artist, and Judenplatz, the plaza for the Jewish people. Richard Serra, Tilted Ark. Before its removal. See, a lot of this stuff, all controversial. The war memorials and the Holocaust memorial still stand, but this was like a real controversy too. This is in New York City. And it was called a tilted ark, and it's basically a slight arc, and it's basically Corten steel welded together, and it's like a big, tall wall. I can see, yeah, it's hard to get the scale from this, and it doesn't have the dimensions, but that's probably about like 8 or 10 feet high. Have any of you seen the Richard Serra in downtown St. Louis? This is up by the courthouse. As a matter of fact, there is the civil courthouse, And over on this side is the Carnahan Courthouse building. But here it is. Big Corten steel. So what's that all about? I have been fortunate enough to, actually, the St. Louis Art Museum brought Richard Serra to do a lecture about his work. And I was lucky enough to attend that. And what he talked about was that he thought these steel plates were almost like exposing the infrastructure, the skeletal parts of these urban environments. And so he talked about these here, which is a little different than the tilted arc, but he said these here in St. Louis, I want the viewer to negotiate these. I want them to walk inside. I want them to get the view back this way. I want them to feel the space enclosed, and I want them to come over here and see what you can see from this space as it is framed by the sculpture. I want you to get inside and outside and just let it be. Don't expect it to be of something. Expect it to be something. And basically what it is public art. The Big Beam, Chicago, 2004. Another one of these public art things, polished stainless steel. Anybody you ever seen this before? It's right outside the Art Institute, just a block, half a block north. This is like really cool. And it's so cool. And look at how people engage this. This is the kind of engagement that I'm talking about here, but this doesn't excite people as much as seeing this distorted reality and seeing themselves and touching themselves and seeing, it's like, and for on the other side over here, and I haven't been there for a while, but they used to have this video art thing going on the side over here, big, huge jumbo screen. But at any rate, Anish Kapoor, and it's called Cloud Gate, but everybody says it's the Big Beam. And that is like, I think if you're an artist, that's really where you want to be, where everybody knows what you've done and they like it and they come see it, they take pictures. Let's see, yeah, here's somebody. Yeah, she got her phone out, but you know, there we go. And then there are other people that just do, in this case, trying to put a Korean house. And this is in Liverpool, England, but you know, they kind of take a whole house, use it as a living Lego block, sticking it in between two other buildings. You know, it's about the space. It's about engaging it. That's what this is, and this as well. I Am Pei, the pyramid. This is the Louvre Museum, where a lot of the stuff we looked at resides. But they dug underneath here outside the Louvre because they had more art than they could fit in this monstrous building. And so they dug underneath and they asked I Am Pei, the architect, to put something out there in this plaza area. And so this is it. It's a glass pyramid. And if you're underground and you're in the Louvre and you can look up, you can see this from the inside, or if you're here, you see it from the outside. And that is really kind of a touchstone of a lot of public sculpture. And so, yeah, a lot of people, oh boy, yeah. Denver, yeah, this is kind of what I wanted to get to. And I want to go back here because this building, I don't have a view of it from the outside, but it's the Solomon Guggenheim Museum in New York City. And you see how it spirals? The outside of the building spirals. And it's not built on a horizontal vertical axis, it's a spiral. And this is the installation, but typically those walls that I'm pointing to, they all have two-dimensional art, paintings all over this thing. But this was designed by an architect, Frank Lloyd Wright, one of the most famous architects ever produced in this country. And the Guggenheim got an architect to design their museum because they wanted to break. There's another Guggenheim photo. Because most of the art museums that were ever around were like this. You can go to St. Louis Art Museum, it's not this long, but it's this architectural style. It's actually more like a cathedral or a courthouse or some official building. But Guggenheim wanted something different. He said, let the architect design this museum. And so that's what you get. These architects designing art museum. This is the Denver Art Museum. This is the Guggenheim in Bilbao, Spain. And Frank Gehry did the University of Minnesota. And actually, when I saw Richard Serra, he was talking about this, but he's good friends with Frank Gehry, who designed all of this stuff. And they were kind of competitive rivals. They were associates. Anyway, Sarah said, all you architects ever do is take the stuff we invent in sculpture and apply it to buildings. Anyway, I don't know. But I got to end this right here because I got something here. I'm hoping. That there. Yeah, there we're going to get to it. Assignments. This is what I want to bring your attention to, but it's not due until Saturday. But I want you to know it's here. And it's a two-part question. An attached PDF or docx file, answer the following questions. And in this case, I actually just had 2 questions. And so 2 pages, 1 for each question. How has the role of the Western artist and his or her art changed over the past 500 years? And basically what we've talked about. You can push that up to 600 that we got this far, but bottom line, what we've studied and how is it the same? So that, and it's available until Saturday at midnight. Unfortunately, that's going to be when it closes too, because I'm on deadlines now. I don't really have a lot of extra time to put on the back end of this. But I want you to think about it. If you got questions about this question, please, let's talk about it on Wednesday. And so it's 4:44. Yeah. I guess I can let you go about 45 seconds early. See you then.